Hi, it's Laura Bohinnon, Heart of Ukraine Ministries. It is the 20th of March, which means it's the 25th day of the war. Today we went into the city for church, which is the first time we've done it since the war has broken out. And part of the reason was because we had a baptism. Out of the 3 men who left on Saturday saying that they wanted to join the military, one of them had accepted Christ a couple weeks ago and he wanted to be baptized, so the pastor worked that out. So it was very good to see them, at the church service, and it's important for them to understand that even when they do leave our rehab center, we still want a relationship with them. We still want to talk with them. So we had that baptism today, which was really exciting, and it just really lifted up the whole church. On the way home, we stopped in the town nearest us, and there was some air raid sirens, and we found out later that a rocket had been shot into our territory, but it was shot down by the Ukrainian military, which is good news. So pretty much with those guys gone, Mark is taking care of all of the cooking, and I'm taking care of the animals, and I'm just kind of slowly training the one guy here with us because he's only been with us a short time, and he's a little bit older, and he kind of likes to do things his own way, so I'm having to rein him in a little bit, but he's helping me with filling up water buckets and carrying other buckets and those kind of things. So I'm kind of responsible for the animals here, and so that's why I've kind of taken over feeding the animals, all the pigs, the rabbits, the chickens, the turkey ducks, the geese. So it kind of a full-time job. I'm definitely getting my step count, well over 10,000 today, no problem. Okay, let me get to some news. The actor Pasha Lee, who was killed by a Russian fireballs in Irpin, which is just outside of Kiev, was buried in his hometown, and it's up in the Carpathian Mountains. And hundreds of the Carpathians came out to see this 33-year-old fighter off. He actually had joined the military. He was an actor, an artist, and a ballet dancer, among other things. So several very famous people here have been killed. He was fighting in the military. Some other people were just in apartments or places like that were bombed. Humanitarian corridors continue to be planned in several locations. I think last time I counted 10 of them. Some are successful and some are not. Some are stopped by Russian soldiers and turned back, while others are eventually let through. So during this past week, we had 39,000 people were evacuated out of Mariupol by private transportation cars, despite the shelling that has gone on. On the afternoon of March 19th, 363 more cars with 2,128 residents arrived from Mariupol to Zaporozhye, and of this, 648 were children. So there's still a lot of children that are there in that town. Russian soldiers were putting white armbands on the Mariupol citizens so that Ukrainian defenders would confuse them with Russians, because the Russians are wearing the white, Ukrainians are wearing yellow pretty much. It's kind of interesting how they wear an armband, probably because the Slavic peoples look very similar. The uniforms are very similar, but it just kind of helps to determine who's who. But they were setting up civilians to be killed by Ukrainians. I'm not sure if that was successful or not, but it sounds like they kind of stopped it once they realized what was going on. In the east, the head of the Lugansk Regional Staff Administration said there's not a single settlement in all of the Lugansk region that hasn't suffered from the Russians. The cities are now multi-story ruins. Every neighborhood is something like out of a horror film, and entire blocks and streets are totally uninhabitable. I'm going to give a number of brief information about different briefings that happened today. The main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Defense Ministry said the Russian elites are considering the possibility of removing Putin. That's kind of what the scuttlebutt that they're getting from their spies. The Russian Federation is sending another terrorist group to Ukraine to eliminate the leadership of Ukraine. So obviously we know about it and we're watching for it. There are reports that Russia is preparing to use minors in the war against Ukraine. And they actually published some documents that they had obtained from the Russian government of course, through probably spies that are documenting that. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, Sergei Sohugi, if I said it right, is the one that's signature is on those documents. Russia is transferring additional trains of military equipment from different regions, including engineering vehicles for construction of temporary bridges. And this is mainly for Kiev because there's a lot of rivers there. So let's talk about Belarus for a minute. There are some signs that the armed forces of the Republic of Belarus are preparing for a direct invasion into the territory of Ukraine. They are doing aerial reconnaissance and shelling of positions of Ukrainian soldiers using aviation and artillery. T-72 tanks and an obstacle engineering vehicle were spotted not so far from the crossing of an area that's in Belarus but headed toward Ukraine. Belarus citizens reports that leaflets are being posted all around that say that Belarusians are cannon fodder for Russia and that Lukashenko is preparing to fight with Ukraine. And these notices are kind of showing up in all the courtyards of all the different apartment complexes. There is already official information on the page of the General Staff of Armed Forces for Ukraine, documenting the preparations of Belarus for active aggression on the border with Ukraine. But there's already a lot of fear and reluctance among the military in Belarus to comply with these orders. So it's kind of a high point. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation has made public the fact that the Gomel Civil Airport, not a military airport, but a civilian airport in Belarus, was used to make strikes against Ukraine. 97% of all Belarusians do not want to support Belarus in the war against Ukraine. So this was established by a survey that was done. So the Belarusian people don't want to be a part of this. They don't want to send their military to fight Ukraine. Some good news, the governor of the Lugansk region said that the armed forces of Ukraine has destroyed a strategic Russian fuel depot, which is very important because they're running out of fuel. That's why a lot of the columns are being abandoned, because they expected to kind of blow in and take resources from Ukraine to continue on, and that's not happened. So the fact that they've set up a fuel depot and it's been hit is extremely important. Within days, Ukraine will receive air defense systems and other weapons from the United States. And the total amount of the U.S. military aid for Kiev has reached $2 billion. The armed forces of Ukraine are receiving weapons that they've already been trained in when a lot of the American military was here over the past couple years. Ukrainian military again broke up a Russian checkpoint in Izum and in the Kharkov region, which is in the east. And one of the things is there's kind of like these home state militias that are being, people are joining, and so they are just really harassing the Russians, like at a checkpoint, a roadblock, those kinds of things, and they just kind of hit and then run away. Kind of reminds me of the movie Patriot, when the farmers with their pitchforks started attacking the British Army. And they would just hit them, and take off. So very similar. So these local reserve units and resistance, I just continue to harass the Russians, very, very good thing. Photos of the Russian Army's Tochka U, which is a kind of a high-class missile, on my understanding. It was shot down by Ukrainian troops, and they've actually had a couple pictures of them to show that they're actually shooting them down. Lots of photos of destroyed Russian military equipment, from tanks to armored personnel carriers to fuel trucks to just regular trucks that transport soldiers. I mean, you name it. There's just burnt out hulls of these vehicles all over the place now. The soldiers of the 80th Air Assault Brigade of Ukraine defeated a unit of Russian soldiers in the southern district. We're talking about the 126th Coastal Defense Brigade of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation. And this military base is based in Crimea, the occupied territory of Ukraine by Russia. And so it has been down there for quite some time, and they were coming north, and they have been defeated. So let's see, international news. Zelensky is using every opportunity, every news media, every country to make statements about Ukraine, because if this doesn't get resolved, it could easily develop into World War III. And what Putin is doing right now is very akin to what Hitler did. Just some of his rhetoric. I watched his speech where people were bussed in unknowingly. And some, actually, I saw some documentation today, some people were saying they were paid to be there. But in his speech, there was just some very similar phrases to what you would have heard out of Hitler. So, very interesting. So the United Kingdom Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, is warning that Russia could be using the peace talks as a smoke screen to allow the Kremlin to regroup with a new offensive with troops. And that's definitely something that the Ukrainian military is seeing intelligence on, is that they're just using this process for the peace talks, just to recover from their defeats and to put more troops in there and to attack Ukraine again. Germany sent civil protection and firefighting equipment to Ukraine, including 21 portable fire pumps, as well as protective clothing, rescue equipment, an evacuation bus. 9 trucks with heavy firefighting equipment are expected in Ukraine on Monday, and about 16,000 breathing apparatuses are expected also on Wednesday. Not on Monday, but on Wednesday, which is really good, because in Kiev, a fire truck, there was a fire truck that was blown up as it was responding to a fire, and I'm not sure, it kind of looked like a missile or a rocket attacked in the side of the fire truck. Anyway, President Zelensky today spoke in front of the Israeli parliament. It's one of the big things in the news today. Kiev, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of the Russian troops, there's been 127 saboteurs that have actually been arrested. I think 2 days ago I mentioned how many had been eliminated, but these are ones from that they had actually taken into custody. So it was about 14 different groups of 127 people. Let's see, another attack on a residential area by Russian soldiers in Kiev. Not really sure yet if it was a missile or a planted bomb, but it hit an apartment building. The first deputy mayor of Kiev was on the phone with a radio station or a news media station, and he said every day up to 1,000 people are evacuated to Kiev from the surrounding Kiev and Chernihiv regions. Kiev is protected, and like I said the last time, there's 3 rings now of defenses. There are many more people who are wishing to join the military, and the Ukrainian army, well, Ukraine just doesn't have the money to outfit them in uniforms and Kevlar vests and helmets and guns and those kind of things. So lots of soldiers, lots of people wanting to volunteer, just not the equipment to equip them. Businesses are recovering in Kiev. There's actually been food delivery that's happened. A lot of businesses are opening back up. Pharmacies, grocery stores, markets, mini markets, a lot of them are back to work within the city of Kiev. And one thing that you have to understand here is we have a state that's called Kiev, and then we have different regions, kind of like counties, and then you have the county of Kiev, and then you have the city of Kiev. So when you listen to these different things about these different areas, you kind of need to really pay attention. Is it the city, is it the region, or is it the state? So one thing that's really cool in the news is Ukrainian protests. In Kharkovka, town in the Kherson region, local protesters went out with Ukrainian flags and everything and protested the Russians that are there in their little town. And they were walking down the main street, and then I saw another video with hundreds of people, maybe even up to 1,000 in the main square of the town protesting. Also in the town or the city of Kherson was some unarmed Ukrainians with flags that challenged some Russian vehicles, and the Russian vehicles started backing up. And in the video you can see one of them is just backing up from them, and in the background some others are turning around, and it's just they're like running away. And these are just Ukrainians with flags. There's no weapons or anything, you know, so kind of cool. Ukrainians, whew, brave people. In a small town in the Zaporozhye region, again, locals went to the streets to protest against the Russian army who were there. And eyewitnesses said that the Russian soldiers were starting to detain people, shooting into the air, and trying to intimidate people in the city to leave and not participate in this demonstration. It did not work. And it's kind of interesting that a lot of these Russian soldiers who showed up to detain people showed up at the very end when people were already starting to go home. In Russia, the head of the Russian 652nd Group of Information and Psychological Operations received a very severe reprimand for their poor work in creating the so-called Kherson People's Republic. The Kremlin leadership is very dissatisfied with this fact because Ukrainians are resisting, and they've not been able to even have a conditionally indicative picture that they can use for the Russian media. Go Ukraine. Some atrocities, new atrocities, you know, we've talked a lot about them. Oh, I did hear some really, really good news. Remember the bombing that happened on the drama theater in Mariupol that had 1,000 to 1,500 refugees in it? They were actually down in a bomb shelter underneath the theater, and they are now getting a lot of the debris out, and they're finding that most of the people there, they survived the bombing, which is a miracle. We haven't heard any numbers yet on injured people or anybody who's dead, but they're still continuing to dig people out of there. So when the news first hit, a lot of people didn't realize it was actually a bomb shelter under the theater. But the Russians are now hitting another bomb shelter, trying to get to the refugees there. The Russians have started using cluster bombs, which is internationally banned, and I actually saw a video of it in Kharkov, in a specific district. And so those are definitely banned by the international community, and they're not supposed to be used, but Russians are using them here. They are kidnapping more city officials in the different towns and villages that they're taking over. And one, Inner Hodor, Russian soldiers kidnapped the first deputy mayor. His name was Ivan. And then the people started protesting in the courtyard, demanding their mayor to be released. Let's see. The Russian military arrived to try and disband the protest, but it was pretty much already over, and they tried to capture a few participants in the event and put them in the car, but then all of a sudden the people who were leaving turned around and encircled the Russian military. Hundreds of people stood up and literally saved the lives of their countrymen who were getting ready to be dragged off by the Russians. The Russians started shooting in the air, but stopped trying to detain anybody. So everybody was able to leave and no one was arrested. They continue to pretend. In one area outside of Kiev, Dumur, the Russians hung their flag, appointed their head of the community, and staged a holiday with fireworks. The daughter of a local resident who's been there from the very beginning called in and was able to tell what was going on about them hanging the flag. They rounded up all the residents and tried to set up this fireworks, and they actually blew up a mine behind the city council building and tried to say, look, the Ukrainians are trying to shoot you down. But everybody knew it was them that had done it, you know. But they're just... That's so common in a lot of the smaller towns that they're taking over. So I want to end with a couple daily briefings by the advisor of the head of the president's office, Alitsky Arestovich. And apparently He has a military background and he studied strategy. And he said a couple years ago that Russia was probably going to invade in 2021 or 2022. And he talked about how he expected them to attack, and it's pretty much come true. So it's given him a lot of credibility when he speaks now. So what he told us today, the situation on the front lines has frozen basically because the Russians don't have the resources to change anything significantly now. The number of shellings and airstrikes on Ukrainian cities by the Russian army has decreased because they're waiting to be resupplied. According to Ukrainian intelligence, after the commanders of the Russian army failed to complete their tasks, they are being pressed upon by Putin. He is demoralizing them, humiliating them in meetings, screaming at them. Some of them are actually being fired back in Moscow or the Kremlin or wherever he's hiding out. A general military update. Since the beginning of the war, the enemy has made 291 missile strikes. Now, this isn't rockets. This is missile strikes. They've used 459 ground, sea, and air-based missiles, and they've conducted 1,403 air raids with, I'm assuming, airplanes and helicopters. Today around noon, Mariupol was shelled by 4 ships of the Russian Navy out in the Azov Sea, I believe. In the Lugansk region, the Russian Federation soldiers fired at a nursing home with a tank. And pretty much 56 people died on the spot. They haven't been able to get close to apparently find anybody else, but they knew from records that there was 56 people there. Yeah, an elderly home, shooting them with the tank. A little bit of overkill there, yeah? Okay, the last briefing, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine gave his briefing at 6 p.m. tonight. Troops of the Russian Federation have lost their offensive potential. Their advance has been stopped in almost all directions. To make up for the losses of personnel in the Russian army units, the military commissariats, which is a specific department in the Russian army that's basically in charge of providing food and supplies, they are being used to recruit new military soldiers. And it's been documented in a couple regions there. They're trying to do it covertly, but the word has gotten out that that's exactly what they're doing. So people in these specific areas do not want to participate in the war, so they're having a really hard time. Russian propagandists have begun preparing the population of Russia for a long war. According to available information, during the visit of the head of the Libyan National Army, Khalifa Haftar, to Moscow, agreements were reached on sending Libyan volunteers to Ukraine in order to participate in hostilities on the side of the Russian military. He is having to recruit from all sorts of places, and I'm sure he's paying a pretty penny for it. In the temporarily occupied territories of Lugansk and Donetsk that have been occupied for a number of years now, they are trying to mobilize people, and they're actually forcing some of the Ukrainians that live there into the Russian military. And like I think I said before, there was one unit that just totally surrendered to Ukrainians and said, we were teachers in the schools, and they came around and gathered us and forced us to fight. During the implementation of another attempt to attack Kiev, the Russian troops lost the detachment of the 6th Tank Regiment. So Ukraine is still kicking Russian butt. So that's it for tonight. Again, just continue to keep Ukraine in prayers. Ukraine is winning the war at this point. They've stopped Russia dead in their tracks, and they're starting to take back territory. But it's a very slow process. A lot of it is urban warfare, which is very dangerous, very difficult to clear areas. And one of the good things is that the humanitarian corridors where they are evacuating people so that Ukrainian soldiers don't have to worry about protecting the residents in some of these areas, that they can just focus on fighting the Russian military. But hopefully Ukraine will be taking back more and more territory that they lost in the first couple days. But the Russian army hasn't been able to move forward at all. It's a good thing. Of course, there's the talk about the nuclear weapons being used by Putin. Some people say that it's a bluff of a bully, and other people say that he is that arrogant that he would use them. he's pretty much isolated. He doesn't really know how to use social media, so he's kind of clueless. There was one video that I watched where he had a meeting with a lot of young entrepreneurs, and one young girl said, "Would you like could you like or subscribe to my YouTube channel?" And so the word subscribe in Russian is very similar to the word signature. And so he was like, "Where do I sign?" And she's like, "No, subscribe to my YouTube channel." He just didn't have any idea at all. There was another picture today of the president of Ukraine and a lot of the head people and how young they are, and there was some really good patriotic Ukrainian music. And then they showed the pictures of Putin and a lot of the leaders who are over 70 years old in Russia with kind of this sad, lethargic kind of Russian song. So it was kind of one of the jokes today. But yeah, they just haven't kept up with the times in their strategy, in their tactics, or how to win the propaganda war. They can just do it at home because they isolate their people. So anyway, that's it. Hopefully I'll get some more videos out for you this week. It just depends on how busy we are. So God bless. Thank you again for all your prayers and all your support.